Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch with me. He is the director of the Initiative for Palestinian Authority, Accountability and Reform in Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and a senior legal analyst at Human Rights Voices. He served for 19 years in the IDF Military Advocate General Corps. In his last position, he served as a director of the military prosecution in Judea and Samaria. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us. The first thing that I wanted to ask you is about the hostage situation, which you're unfolding. And it's pretty interesting that in the last 17 days, how situation has turned out to be. We have seen in the first 2 weeks, there has not been much conversation about exchanges of prisoners either, or how the hostage situation will pan out. But in the last 5 days, we have seen 4 hostages being released. Of course, there has been mediation, but why do you see Hamas has a sudden change of heart and tries to release the hostages?
So I think that first it's important to give an explanation of what we're talking about. We're talking about a massive terrorist attack conducted on the 7th of October by Hamas and other terrorists from the Gaza Strip on some 30 civilian installations, cities, towns, villages, kibbutzim, in Israel. There they slaughtered en masse 1,400 people, raped, pillaged, tortured. They then took, according to pre-designated plans and operational instructions, they then took as many hostages as possible. They took babies. Dvir Bibas, who's just 9 months old, is a hostage to people who have dementia, people who are sick, women, children, the injured, everybody they took as hostages. Now, these are monstrous genocidal terrorists. They have one goal and one goal alone: to destroy and entirely destroy Israel. And within that context and within that context of their terrorist activities, they not only employ methods of terrible, gross, and barbarian manner and the likes, but they also engage in not a small amount of psychological warfare. Some of that psychological warfare is showing videos of the hostages being executed and then sending those videos to the families of the people executed. Some of them are showing videos of hostages saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's all right, I'm fine." But really, we know that they're not. And part of that psychological warfare is also the understanding that we can control whatever we want. We can release whoever we want. We can really provide you with all of the hostages if only you give in to all of our demands. This is how terrorists work. This is how genocidal maniacs instill fear in civilized societies. And that is what Hamas is doing. That is what the terrorists are doing. It's not only Hamas who's holding terrorists there. It's also the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a communist terrorist organization, and also Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Islamic fundamentalist terrorist organization. So you have all of these terrorists gathering together to not only inflict as much death as possible, but also then to create this atmosphere of terror in the hearts of as many people as possible.
And why was this sudden change of heart then, sir? Because was it because they wanted to show the international community? Because a great campaign that Israel has actually launched in the last 2 weeks has been to compare Hamas with ISIS. And is that one of the reasons that Hamas wanted to show to the international community that they are not ISIS? They cannot be compared to ISIS because ISIS doesn't return the prisoners. and they're trying to return the prisoners to show to the international community that they deserve not to be compared with ISIS. Is that one of the reasons?
Well, so I think the international community for many, many years saw Hamas and its leadership and governorship in Gaza as something almost legitimate. Hamas, we have to remember, was democratically elected by the Palestinian people as their representatives. This is what the international community has seen. What Hamas proved on the 7th of October, and there's no way back from that. There is no return. What Hamas proved on the 7th of October is that they are no different from ISIS. If you can butcher, mutilate, torture, of one account that was given of a pregnant woman who the first responders found on her stomach, when they turned her over, they found that her stomach had been ripped apart. I apologize for the graphic description. Had been ripped apart, her fetus dragged out of her body and then stabbed to death. Pictures of babies being decapitated. These are things which there is no return. This Hamas is ISIS. And whatever they think they're doing now to try and placate the international community, so they released two of the hostages. They released 4 hostages. They are still holding another 250 hostages. Again, babies, women, children. Some of the hostages that they are holding, just to describe the horrific nature, are children that have been orphaned because these barbaric ISIS terrorists butchered both of their parents. Little children, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, who have nothing to come back to. Their families have been annihilated. There is no way back for these ISIS terrorists, and it doesn't matter whether they piecemeal release 2 terrorists or piecemeal release 2 hostages. It makes no difference. There is no difference between them and ISIS.
And looking at how they are releasing the hostages, this is what I also wanted to ask you, sir, because if they would wanted the hostages to be released on humanitarian ground, they would have just released all the hostages, possibly at least a majority of the hostages. Are they releasing 2 hostages at a time to buy in time from Israel or the international community so that Israel doesn't invade Gaza soon or seize Gaza soon? They're just buying the time by releasing 2 hostages at a time.
So unfortunately, as part of this genocidal terrorist organization, ISIS-like organizations' theory and policy, they constantly use innocent civilians as human shields. Most of the time, they use the Gazan civilian population, which is where they hide their rocket launchers, which is where they hide their arms and their weapon caches, to specifically use the civilian population as their human shields. That is exactly what they're doing with the hostages. They've already clearly said, Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman for Hamas, said that as soon as an Israeli ground operation starts in Gaza, they will start executing all of the hostages. This is something which cannot be taken lightly. It is understood, and this is what they intend to do. And we're going to see, I think, in the not distant future, horrific pictures of live broadcast executions of Israeli hostages that they will broadcast around the world. This is a scene that we're going to see, which will no doubt equate them with ISIS. What we're also going to see, I would assume, we haven't seen it yet, but I assume that we're going to see it, is that the Israeli figures and numbers of how many hostages they're holding aren't correct. They're holding many more. We're not going to tell anything about what their state is, what their condition is. A son of close friends of ours was among those who were kidnapped. He was at the party, at the beach party, at the nature party that was attacked by these genocidal ISIS terrorists. He ran for shelter. He and his friend were throwing grenades that they were throwing into the safe areas back out at them until his friend was killed. He himself lost his arm and was then taken captive by Hamas. These are barbarians. It doesn't matter how many terrorists they piecemeal release now. Hamas is ISIS and ISIS is Hamas. And they will continue to demonstrate their barbaric nature.
How the ground offensives have been kept at hold for a while, and you have a long experience serving in the IDF. From that, I wanted to understand, is the pressure of not starting with the ground offensives? Is my signal bad?
I didn't hear your question properly. You were breaking up.
Sure, sir. I'll repeat once more. I'm saying the ground offensives, which was supposed to start sooner or later, has been kept on hold for quite some time. And I want to understand from your experience of serving in the IDF for around 2 decades, of why is the ground offensive against Hamas not started? We've just seen airstrikes. Is it on hold because the exchange of prisoners is still on a picture? And of the threat that you mentioned that Hamas will start executing the prisoner as soon as the ground offensive begins? Or is there a pressure from the international community because Hamas has finally started releasing hostages?
So I think that there is a combination of a number of different factors that are playing into this question and into the decision as to when to launch the ground offensive. The understanding is that Israel's ground offensive will possibly have different consequences. One of the main consequences that I think is more of a guiding rule with starting the ground offensive is what will happen in our northern border. Now, we know that much of what is going on today, the genocidal attack of the ISIS terrorists, was part of an Iranian-led plan to scuttle any type of peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the opportunity to extend the Abraham Accords to really from the Arabian Sea all the way through in the east to Morocco in the west, really creating this massive area of peace in the Middle East. That is what Iran is trying to undermine. And so when we're talking about the ground offensive, we've also understood that Hezbollah on our northern border with Lebanon has also threatened that if Israel goes into Gaza, then they will also attack Israel. That will also possibly bring on attacks as we've seen from Iran and its proxies, including the Houthis shooting missiles from Yemen, as we saw last week. So all of those things required us to ensure that we were not only Israel alone, but as an international coalition prepared to deal with the different threats. That is partially the Americans sending 2 aircraft carriers to the area and diverting not a small amount of both tactical and strategic bombers to the Middle East to respond to that type of a threat. Also, the discussions with the Lebanese government and really everything that goes around that. So preparing for that ground operation required initial preparations. It shouldn't and couldn't have been a knee-jerk reaction. On top of that, Israel has been not only sitting by itself and waiting around. We have been training our ground forces and really making sure that they are the level of operational preparedness in order to actively and efficiently and really aggressively go in and attack and destroy the terrorists in Gaza. At the same time, and this is something which cannot be understated, Israel has carried out some between 200 and 600 airstrikes every day over the last 16 days, attacking the terrorist infrastructure, making sure that the terrorists do not raise their heads to the greatest extent possible, destroying arms caches, destroying rocket launchers, destroying strategic assets. That's something which, when you add on to the psychological effect of those continuous bombings on the terrorists, it means that the terrorists really haven't been sleeping for 2 weeks, almost. So when we go into Gaza, the cumulative effect is that firstly, we've attacked most of and destroyed most of their strategic assets. we're then meeting an enemy which is fatigued and discombobulated because we've disrupted all of their communication services. They will no doubt try and show incidental tactical wins along the way. But on the broader picture, the terrorists have taken until now and are still going to be subject to a massive onslaught that will hopefully leave Gaza, both for the Gazan civilians and for Israel, in a much better place where it is devoid. That is the goal. Devoid of any terrorists. That has to be stressed. That is our goal, and that is what we intend to do.
And this actually brings me to a discussion of why, for our viewers, if you could explain why going on a military operation to rescue the civilians is not a great option in Gaza. Why has the idea of not carried out an operation to actually hunt for the terrorists, take them down, and take away the hostages? Why is not that an option in Gaza?
Without giving away any state secrets, why do you assume that we're not doing that?
Is it difficult in that order to navigate in Gaza?
Well, I think that it must be understood, and really everyone should assume this as a given. And really, I have to stress that I have no secret intelligence information on it, but as an analyst of the situation and in my previous military career, I think it needs to be assumed that there are already Israeli special forces operating extensively on the ground in Gaza. That has to be understood. I think the terrorists should understand that as well, and that they should know that whenever they stick their heads up, there's going to be someone there to put a bullet in between their eyes. That's a message that they have to understand. All these terrorists are legitimate targets, and if they think that we're only bombing them from the air, I think they're in for not a small amount of surprises.
But isn't it a little difficult as well to have ground operations in a ravaged urban area where you see just destroyed buildings and scattered hostages? Isn't it difficult as well to carry out the operational necessities for any of such rescue missions, if we would like to put?
Yes, without question. The war in Gaza is not going to be simple. We don't have any illusions about that. It is going to be hard fighting in a very complex environment. Urban warfare is always very complicated, and especially when the terrorists intentionally embed themselves within the civilian population. That Hamas has spent almost all, if not all, of the international aid that has flowed into Gaza over the last 15, 16 years on building an entire underground city where they hide like rats running around in the sewers, where they hide their strategic assets and where they can potentially hide the terrorists. This is not going to be easy at all, but we understand that, and we take into account that this is something that needs to be done for the benefit of all humanity, and not just as a specific fight of Israel against these terrorists. Eradicating ISIS, eradicating that barbarity from society is something which should be a common goal for everyone who respects human dignity and human life. And so, yes, there are no illusions. It will be difficult.
And since you mentioned actually about the tunnels, actually, which is one of the things that a couple of last questions that I have, and one of them is actually about the tunnels. It's the underground warfare that would actually prolong, because the humanitarian aid that was being flushed, they have used to build tunnels, and the locations of those tunnels are quite unknown. Even the gravity of the situation of how long these tunnels are and where those locations are also very difficult to understand. So, even though ground operation might be a viable option, do you think in the longer term, having invading Gaza and looking at the future situation where you're caught between the tunnels, is it a great option in the longer run?
Well, so there's no way that we can end this period and end this war without eradicating Hamas and the other ISIS terrorists in the Gaza Strip. It is untenable that our civilians continue for any extended period or any additional period even to be subject to the indiscriminate rocket fire that we've seen from Gaza, that they potentially have the ability to regroup and again carry out such a massacre at any given future time. The fighting will be hard. The IDF needs to locate all of these tunnels and explode them and destroy them. I think we will possibly see scenes of these tunnels and these underground areas being blown up by the IDF, and then suddenly you'll see huge parts of cities falling into the ground, because that's what Hamas has done. Hamas has undermined the very foundations of these residential areas in order to hide its military capabilities, its terrorist capabilities, and those capabilities have to be destroyed. A situation in which Hamas is allowed to butcher 1,400 people and then remain to see the next day and to tell the story, returning to govern the Gaza Strip, is absolutely untenable. Hamas will be destroyed, and that has to be understood, however difficult it may be.
So, this is one thing that I wanted to understand, that it's been 17, 18 days to the war, and yet we see the offensive capabilities of Hamas has not yet been destroyed. In the sense, we see rockets still incoming. I mean, yesterday as well, we have seen the southern part of Israel still, some of the neighboring areas to Gaza still faces a barrage of rockets. This is where I want to understand, did we undermine the capabilities or offensive capabilities of Hamas by any chance in the last 2 years where we haven't acted upon it? And how long before we actually at least crush the offensive capabilities of Hamas so that the rocket attacks or even some sort of offenses that Hamas is planning it at least stops?
So I don't think anyone was under any illusions about the Hamas capabilities. They fired over 7,500 rockets and missiles at Israel, some of them even long range, some of them reaching and covering most of Israel's coastal plain, where 80% of our population is concentrated. I don't think anyone underestimated that threat. What was done was to live in this conception that you can appease the beast, that in somehow you can appease ISIS, you can appease these genocidal terrorists. So what Israel's done over the last 3 years, 2.5 years, is to allow increasing numbers of Gazans into Israel in order to work. What we're now discovering is that those same people who were given this opportunity to come into Israel to work, to earn money, to support their families, were actually the ones gathering intelligence for these genocidal terrorists. They were the ones who were providing the genocidal terrorists with accurate maps of all of Israel, mapping out the houses in every single one of the towns, villages, and cities and kibbutzim that were then attacked. This is what we saw. So we're not under any illusions as to their capabilities. I would assume, again, since we're dealing with a terrorist organization who they don't really care about human life. They have no respect for human dignity. What they will try and do, and what I assume again we will see in the near future, and even as Israel enters with its ground forces, we will see Hamas continuing to fire its long distance rockets, not only close to the area close to Gaza, but because what they're looking for really is this picture of a victory. They're not looking, they don't believe now that they can truly destroy the entire Israeli military war machine. So now they're looking for this picture of a victory that they can sell to the world and say, look, we were just trying to do as much as we could. This is something which I think we'll see coming up. This is part of that terrorist ISIS psychological warfare, which is implicit within their fighting doctrine. And so it'll take a while until we can really destroy their aggressive capabilities. And I think that we will possibly even see, as I said, a number of different and additional attacks on Israel's large civilian population, and not only on the areas surrounding Gaza.
Okay, sir. So the last thing that I wanted to ask you before I let you go is a couple of legal challenges, or something that probably you would be able to give us a better overview, is the legality of the Gaza Seas actually. Is there any provision in international law that stops Israel from controlling Gaza or having or seizing Gaza? That's one. And the other thing that I wanted to understand is Israel not providing humanitarian aid. Is there any legality that stops Israel from doing so? If Israel chooses not to supply humanitarian assistance or aid to Gaza, is there anything that mandates Israel to do so?
So the answer to the question really, there are a few questions there. Firstly, international law recognizes the right of a country to put a siege on a hostile nation, on a hostile area. That is something which international law specifically provides for and understands. International law, obviously, the laws of war also clearly allow for Israel to attack their military targets and to really obliterate Hamas. Now, though the requirement that Israel simultaneously provide those fighting forces with the ability to continue fighting is obviously completely contradictory. And there is no source for that in international law. For example, this discussion on providing Israel continue to provide Gaza with electricity. Firstly, on a practical level, that is almost impossible. Hamas destroyed 9 of the 10 electricity lines going into Gaza during its onslaught. They intentionally did that in order to create this impression of a humanitarian crisis and to force Israel to continue providing electricity to support their war effort. That is completely untenable. So there is no requirement, obviously, for Israel to provide electricity to Gaza. As regards purely humanitarian aid, something which cannot be used in any way, shape, or form by the terrorists in order to continue fighting. Now, this is a very broad category because, for example, food does help them continue their war efforts. But when you consider the actual facts on the ground, and here it's important to discuss facts on the ground, there is no food shortage in Gaza whatsoever. We still see, and there are still pictures of supermarkets with food. There is humanitarian aid that can go into the Gaza Strip. Israel's duty under international law is to allow for the provision of humanitarian aid. We do not have to provide it. We do not have to be party to it. There is no requirement that any of that aid that Israel be forced to allow that aid to go into the Gaza Strip through Israel. Gaza, for everyone should know, Gaza has another border. It has a long border with Egypt. Now, whilst everyone is looking at Israel and saying, well, what about Israel's obligations under humanitarian law? Well, why isn't that same question being asked of Egypt? Why is Egypt not allowing refugees from Gaza to enter Egypt and seek refuge there? That is something that the international community needs to force Egypt to ensure that they understand that this is their requirement to allow these innocent Gazans to seek refuge whilst Israel fights and obliterates the terrorists.
Sure, sir. That's all the questions that I had. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us. I hope the situation gets better very soon. And as people from India, we can completely understand the situation, having faced the wrath of radical Islamic extremism ourselves. So,
Exactly right.
our prayers with you. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you very much for having me, and really keep safe. All of civilization needs to really get together and fight this radical Islam and fight these ISIS terrorists. It's for our own, for the future of civilization, really.
Exactly, sir. I completely understand. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us, sir. Have a great day, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.